Welcome. Happy December 5th. We're already in December. That's crazy. This is our 4th parenting class. My name is Becky Montoya-Wright. I work for the Blue Ridge School District as a counselor, and in combination and cooperation with Nexus Coalition and with a grant that is funded from Blue Cross Blue Shield, the grant project is called Not All Wounds Are Visible, and it is providing a lot of education on mental health in an accessible way. So we're doing these Facebook Lives to give people opportunities to tune in and to get this information on their own schedule. So this we're recording live, but it'll be available later for people who want to check into it later. I am teaching this class on parenting, and I always like to start out with a disclaimer that this information in theory is fantastic, but to practice it and to put it into practical application is always trickier than just sitting here talking about it. And that's true for me as well. I definitely have my parenting hiccups, some pretty giant ones at times. And so this is good information, and the more that we think about it, heighten our awareness to these new skills, the more we're going to be successful in practicing them. Just a quick overview, the basis of the classes that I've taught so far and that I will teach through the rest of the school year are coming from a few really helpful resources. The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, fabulous book and highly recommended. And it comes with a companion. Well, you have to get the companion, but I recommend getting the companion, which is the workbook. The Whole Brain Child has all kinds of super great applicable worksheets and skill sets to practice in our parenting. And then a lot of the science, the neuroscience behind the brain and the teenage brain in particular, that helps us understand what's going on with the young people that we support, comes from this book called The Teenage Brain, and this is written by Frances E. Jensen, another fabulous book. I actually have both of these on my audiobook collection and listen to them I teach this stuff, but I listen to them regularly, and I wish I had had those resources as a younger parent. So great and helpful, so I highly recommend those. And those are the basis for what we're going to be talking about and what we have talked about. In our first class, we talked about how the teenage brain is operating from a suboptimal choice behaviors and is driven by the feel-goods. And those feel-goods can come from really helpful places and successfully driven behaviors, but they can also come from really hurtful or dangerous behaviors that can establish some solid patterns for life. And that's why we want to be really aware and supporting our young people. In this way, we essentially become the frontal lobe for the young people that we support, helping them access that information and think through the consequences of their choices. In the second class, we talked about parenting with the brain in mind. And specifically, we talked about integrating the left hemisphere with the right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is where our logic and reason comes from, structure and order. And the right hemisphere of the brain is more of our artistic, creative, emotion, nonlinear driven side. And so when we bring those two, when we're able to parent with both sides of our brain, then we're inviting the people that we support, the children we support, to also operate with that integrated brain approach. And one of the ways that we do this is to strive to connect with the child that we're working with, emotionally connect with them before we attempt to redirect. And the opposite of that would be a command and demand. So we want to steer away from command and demand and work towards really connecting and then redirecting that child. So we talked about that in our second class. And then last time we talked about the 4 common styles of parenting. And those are, that work was done by Baumrind in the 60s and then added to by Maccoby and Martin in the 80s. And then a lot of other people's work, including some of the work that I've shared here, has taken those 4 parenting styles and just included some of the new understanding into those as well. And so what we really want to do is support our young people in an authoritative way where there's strong connection, strong expectations, and where we find ourselves in that one quadrant of that worksheet. And if you look at the Counselor Lady Facebook page and scroll down there, but you'll see the worksheet that shows those 4 parenting quadrants. And it's quite a bit of information, but I think you can navigate it to see where it is that we want to strive to be when we're parenting. And today we're also going to talk about integrating the brain, but instead of talking about the right and the left hemisphere, we're going to talk about integrating the top or frontal lobe of the brain with the lower regions of the brain, our survival mechanisms in the brain. And so ultimately our goal is to be connected and integrated with right and left and with the top and the bottom, and to have full integration in how we're parenting and also in how we're modeling behaviors so that our children can also be utilizing their whole brain, an integrated brain. A couple of thoughts on today's message. As parents, we hope to teach our children to control their impulses, to calm those big feelings, and to make good decisions. Just like we want to integrate that right and that left hemisphere of the brain, we also want to integrate the top and the bottom of the brain, sometimes referred to as the upstairs and the basement, the upstairs of the brain and the basement of the brain. The top of the brain is called the frontal cortex, and that's when I'm referencing that. I'm talking about the part that's in the front of the right and the left hemisphere. And when we are operating from this region of the brain, it's where we're able to access really good information from both the right and the left hemispheres. This is how we drive logical and reasonable decisions. We're able to balance those emotions with the body, have self-understanding and reflection, empathy, morality, and it helps us to think before we act. If I were going to summarize in a nutshell a junior high concern, thinking before we act is sometimes a challenge. So that integration or that utilizing the frontal cortex is really important. The bottom of the brain, or the basement of the brain, is a tiny little nub at the top of the spinal column. It's just a little nub, sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain, it's called the brain stem. And it's a small knob that sits on the top of the spinal column. And this is what drives survival. It drives that fight, flight, freeze response. It also is responsible for those autonomic functions like breathing, blinking, our sensory memory, and strong emotions of fear, anger, and excitement kind of come from this area. And there's a lot of nuance and everything else, and a lot more specificity that someone who studies and understands the brain really in a complicated way would probably not appreciate my simplified explanations, but this is how I understand it to be, and I think it does help us in our parenting efforts. And the survival, the brain stem, the basement, the bottom of the brain, it is going to have us acting before we think. That's kind of the stuff we see where someone jumps out of the way of a bus and they've acted first before they even have really the ability to consciously recognize that they just about got hit by a bus. And so it's an important part of our brain, that brain stem, those survival skills and responses to threats, those are really important for us. What we're looking for is when the frontal cortex and the brain stem, pretty much everything in between, are integrated, this is when a person is able to perform complex tasks. They're able to consider consequences before acting, consider the feelings of others, and make moral or ethical judgments. The frontal cortex doesn't complete its development until the mid-20s, which makes it vulnerable to not working so well in those teen years. If you're working with or supporting teenagers, there's a lot of aha going on right now where you're like, oh, it's not connected or working quite the way we've been or we're hoping. And that doesn't mean that's not a diss on teenagers. When I'm talking to teenagers about the teenage brain, I am quick to point out, this isn't us being critical of you. This is, we wouldn't be critical of a 2-month-old not walking because their body's not developed to do that yet. And we're not critical, or we shouldn't be critical, when a teenager isn't completely plugged in. We need to be patient and supportive of them, as this is just part of the developmental process. So this frontal cortex doesn't complete its development until the mid-20s, making it vulnerable to not working so well. As parents, when we have a better understanding of the teenage brain, then we're able to set more realistic expectations and age-appropriate interactions with them, things that really fit with what they're able to do. And they'll be the first ones to tell you, well, maybe not the first ones, but often they are just as confused at their inability to use logic and reason as we are. Like, they get sometimes on the after side, they're as stumped by what they chose to do as we are, and it's really frustrating to them too. So in that, often we can share their frustration as we work towards being patient with the developmental process that they are experiencing. So the concept we're trying to push today is to engage, don't enrage. So we want to engage the frontal cortex instead of enraging the survival part of the brain. And we talked about in the second class, connecting with compassion and understanding before we redirect. So we talked about how important it is to connect with that right feeling side of the right hemisphere of the brain before moving into more left brain functions of redirecting and strategizing. And so this concept is also really brought into this idea of to engage instead of enraging, because when we engage that frontal lobe and help the young person to access their best information, hopefully we're setting the stage for a more successful parenting outcome. But keep in mind, there's some willingness that has to come from the young person that we're working with for this to happen too. So this is in best approaches. Hopefully this is how we can see this play out often in our parenting, not that it always will. So the redirect requires the top of the brain, the frontal cortex, and that engagement. This is where we're asking our child to think through and to brainstorm some solutions. If the bottom of the brain, that brain stem, that survival piece, is completely enraged, then our child's biology is not going to support the process. In this way, that connecting and redirecting is very much partnered with the engage, don't enrage. Those two concepts, connect and redirect, engage, don't enrage. And that's what we have charge over as parents. That doesn't mean just because we are offering this engagement doesn't mean that the child that we're working with is going to automatically receive it with the energy that we're presenting it. So it may take a while, it may not be seamless. Ultimately, we're looking for that right and left and top and bottom integration in how we respond to parenting situations and in responding to the feelings that our child has and the stressors that are occurring to them. So we might want to consider what seems to precede the meltdowns in our family, the meltdowns between us and our child, the meltdowns that our child is experiencing. And this can be, by brainstorming these in advance, we can start to also consider some possible solutions. Are they emotionally is our child more emotionally fragile when they're hungry, tired, lonely, or sick? Probably. And we can ask ourselves that same question. Are there certain people that elevate our child's stress levels or situations that are especially challenging for them? Do they break down when it's time to leave their favorite places or when mom and dad get a babysitter? When we brainstorm these things that trigger an enraged part of the brain stem for our child, this gives us the opportunity to plan ahead, role play, and troubleshoot potential problem areas. My daughter, who's now 27, when she was little, she had this best friend, Olivia, and Olivia's mother, Geraldine, and these were my daughter's favorite humans on the planet. Geraldine always just provided such a wonderful space and was so much fun for my daughter to go and play there. And she just loved to be there. She loved to be with Olivia, and picking her up was definitely kicking in her survival responses. She was not being willing to leave in a reasonable way. She was treating leaving their home like it was a threat to her survival. And so we began to role play in advance of going over to Olivia's we would role play, okay, Jocelyn, when I come to pick you up, here's some of the words I'm going to say. Tell me how you feel when I say these words, and let's talk about what's happened in the past. Sometimes you run to Olivia's bedroom and you hide under the bed and you don't want to leave, and it's a lot of tears and really sad, but you will get to go there again. And so what could be some words you could say and some behaviors you could try so that when we leave, we feel excited and happy to be together, knowing that we'll go back to Olivia's another day. And so we role played this probably only twice in order, on two different occasions. And then it became a really seamless thing when I would pick her up. And I did the same thing with one of my sons when it was time to leave the park. We started role playing in advance of going to the park, of how hard that was going to be, and different things like that. So this is how we're trying to engage our child's frontal lobe, but it's not going to necessarily be something we can do in the moment of the stressor. So it's something that if you can plan ahead and start to strategize in advance of the situation, might be a really successful parenting strategy. And so that's just an example. You could put in any particular situation that is a little bit more stressful or emotionally driven for you and your children, and consider some strategies that you might be successful in engaging the frontal lobe rather than enraging that survival brainstem. And finally, I just want to talk to us as parents. How about ourselves? What triggers our brain? What is it that gets us more likely to kick into our survival brain rather than staying in our frontal lobe? So an example for many parents might relate to the morning struggle. There are a lot of families that have a rough go in the morning with getting people out the door, trying to get everyone up and fed and dressed and out the door. It can often end with yelling and a lot of relational discord. Especially this is concerning when you consider that this is the energy we're leaving our kids with for the day if we're dropping them off at school. So maybe their last thoughts of their time at home were really all over the place emotionally. So considering how to engage the top of our brains in this process, that might include a lot more preparation the night before. Waking up a little bit earlier. I know for me, waking up quite a bit earlier is what it takes for me to be in a good headspace before I start interacting with the other people in my house. So I have to be up quite a bit earlier to just kind of get some things taken care of in my own mind. And then, I can't say for sure, but I feel like I'm a delight because I get that extra time to kind of get myself in sync. Waking up earlier, sharing the responsibilities with other family members, and then also something that can really contribute to a morning routine is a chart, a list. There's a million of them out there. You can Google them, you can search them. Smart people have put them out there and made them available so that everybody knows what their expectation is and how to get them going with their morning. At the end of the day, it isn't the elevated behaviors or the challenges that we face that determine our success. It's how we responded to them. Our children may exhibit especially naughty behaviors, but we might be able to celebrate our level-headed frontal lobe, right-left hemisphere integrated approach to them. Even if they had if they flipped off the handle completely, we can still celebrate that we kept ourselves integrated. And on the other hand, our children might display really a minimally challenging behavior, only for us to completely flip out and lose our ever-loving minds. It happens. And that really may not have had so much to do with what the child did, but just our response to it. We were in our enraged survival brain, and so we may not have handled that situation in an ideal manner. And that's okay, because we're just going to keep on keeping on. We're going to do the best we can with what we know. And we're going to start noticing the things that challenge us, the things that make it hard for us to operate at our best self. And we're going to start dialing in the ways that we can access the better skill set that we're hoping to have. Brainstem survival life skills, so that brainstem survival, those are life-saving things that are important. Like for me to say we should never be in our survival brain would be really far from the truth. It is a very important part of our brain function. It's that integration of the right, left, front, and basement of the brain coming all together that's going to help us be successful personally, in our parenting, professionally, in all of our interactions. The more that we practice integrating the top, bottom, right, and left of our brain, and the more we heighten our awareness and put some intention there, that is going to give us the opportunity to model whole brain approach to life for our children and for anyone that we have any type of influence over in dealing with their stress, with their relationships, and with their daily living. Self-awareness allows us to dial in these best parenting approaches and to take charge over the one person that we have ultimate charge over, ourselves. Remember, the product of good parenting is the parent. We can really feel good about our parenting, even if our kids are continuing to struggle with some of the outcomes that we're hoping for. We can feel good about our parenting if we know that it's changing who we are and helping us to become a better version of ourselves. So that's our message for today. I am looking forward to doing a Facebook Live with Courtney Hoffmeyer, the principal of the junior high. It won't be a parenting class, but it's going to have some really great parenting information. I believe it's on Thursday, December 14th. If Thursday, December 14th exists in 2023, that's the day we're going to do a Facebook Live with some great information for parents, but great information for others as well. So thank you for joining this class. And if you watch all of the classes and live in Navajo County, you could get your name put in for a drawing. Just saying. Those who know how to reach me, and I'd be interested in sharing more information with you. Big thanks to Blue Cross Blue Shield for the grant that's helping us push this information out there. Have a great rest of your day.